Ito po ang aking ikalimang sona. Isa na lamang ang natitira.
A little less than 2 years before the next national elections, political upheavals have reached unprecedented heights. The power struggle between the executive branch and the judiciary on the issue of President Aquino's Disbursement Acceleration Program or DAP has opened up calls for amendments to the Constitution. And in his recent interview, President Aquino suggested clipping the power of the Supreme Court. He also hinted at running for a second term, things that would require constitutional amendments.
Kayo ang boss ko.
The 1987 Constitution, which was promulgated by President Aquino's mother, limits the term of the president to 6 years. It also prohibits a re-election bid. Recently, even President Aquino's spokesperson has his own shares of slip of the tongue.
But let's wait for the endorsement of the president kung sino ang kanyang hahayagin bilang kanyang kandidato sa 2016 kung sakaling tutuloy ang 2016 election.
This leads many people to ask, are there threats to jeopardize the Philippine democracy?
Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's most pressing issues. It's an interesting time to talk about Philippine politics. Let's weigh in tonight if there's really a need to extend a president's term of office and the need to adjust or improve our current constitution to accommodate reforms. So our debate question for tonight, should we allow constitutional amendments in order to implement the so-called current political reforms? Good evening, I'm Rod Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views. All right, joining us tonight in our discussion is Dr. Edwin Monares, political science professor from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. Good evening, Dr. Monares. Welcome back.
Good evening. It is my position here that political reform should go on, and we are open for changing the Constitution. And if it will mean lifting the term limits, so be it.
All right. Now, on the opposing side is former Bayan Muna Representative Teddy Casino. Welcome back, Representative Teddy.
Thank you, Rod, and
Yes.
Good evening to everyone. I think amending the Constitution at this point is dangerous. It will not be in the best interest of the country if the President pursues on his plan to amend the Constitution, to extend his term, to clip the powers of the judiciary, and to further open up the economy to foreign interests.
All right, so let's discuss, let's start our discussion. Of course, Chacha has become almost like a bad word for a lot of people. No? At the same time, there's a lot of clamor. If you have you talk, may mga barbershop talk, as they say, or coffee shop talk, you hear people saying that it's high time that we change the Constitution. So let's start off first on the topic of term extensions of the president. No? Now, we have in our Constitution the 6 years, the 6-year term of the president. Now, in your mind, I will start first with you, Dr. Monares. Is 6 years short for a president's term? Or do you think we should extend it?
Well, many would say 6 years is long for a very bad president, and 6 years is actually so short for a good president. But you know, the real issue here is that these charter changes will always come up when a president, since FBR, is actually in the twilight of the term of office. So my position, if this is dividing the people during the end times of the term of the president, then why not open na lang this constitution? Let's change it and let's shift the parliamentary system.
Now's the time
let us lift all the term limits.
In other words, there's no right time or good time. If we are going to discuss it anyway, I mean, changing the term limits, so to speak, let's do it now. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, Teddy, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's right. 6 years is too long for a bad president. And even if it's a good president, there are other ways of continuing whatever reforms or legacies that he wants to do. And I think this is symptomatic of this clamor for a term extension is symptomatic of the very personalistic view that we have of our politicians, especially the president, na lahat nakasalalay sa kanya. No? But if there are genuine political parties in the country, it doesn't matter if it's 4 years, if it's 6 years, if it's 12 years. Ang importante naman dyan, yung program, yung platform. But precisely because presidents really don't have programs and platforms that are reflected in their parties, na nagtutuloy-tuloyan.
Yeah, we don't have the two-party system. We don't effectively don't have that, no?
Every time that the president term ends, it always becomes an issue. Ikaw pa rin ba o dapat should we amend the Constitution? But in specifically for President Aquino, I think it will be against the interest of the country if he extends his term.
So in your position is we stick with the 6-year rule?
Yes. 6 years is bad. Another 6 years is, 6 years is too long for a bad president. We have a bad president, so why extend for another 6 years?
All right. So we've with that point that you've made, no, do you agree with although this might probably be a question that I cannot know what your answer will be. Do you agree with the constitutional amendment in order for a president to run again?
No. Yung amendments to the Constitution should always be taken in its context. And at the present context, where you have a president who wants to curtail the powers of the judiciary, who has shown incompetence, who has shown hard-headedness, and even a tendency towards dictatorship, I think it is dangerous to allow him another term. So I am not for amending the Constitution at this time.
Even assuming that we have, let's say, a good president, because you're saying that he's an incompetent president, even assuming that, let's say he was a good president, do you think we should change the Constitution to allow a president to run again?
If he were a good president, he would make the necessary preparations so that after his term, whatever programs and policies, whatever good programs and policies that he has done will be sustained. No? A good president, I think, should be humble enough to admit that not everything relies on him. That he should also try to develop other leaders to take over his place and continue whatever legacy he has.
Dr. Edwin, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that we should have an amendment of the Constitution to allow presidents to have a second term or run again?
Well, riding on what Teddy is saying, description of how good the president is actually relative. It is always good. The president will always be looked at as a good president by all of those who are in the government that are actually benefiting from the presidency. And for those who are not served well, will look at the president as bad. So when is the right time? That's the question. When is the right time to amend the Constitution? When in fact it's been there for 27 years, and then everybody, the academe would say, the businessmen would say that it's about time that we have to change the Constitution, because the Constitution becomes now, it's a problem in itself, with like the economic provisions and all of these people who will always be after when the term is about to end would say, okay, let's amend the Constitution. It's dividing the people. So when is the right time?
I think the bigger problem is that we have had lousy presidents. So and lousy presidents who want to extend their term, and so the people are always opposing Chacha because, why extend the term of a lousy president? And if Ramos wasn't able to do it, and Erap wasn't able to do it, Gloria wasn't able to do it, I think Pinoy will not be able to do it because he has not shown to be any better as far as ordinary people are concerned than his predecessors. In fact, he's just continuing what policies, programs are already
well,
there.
What about following the U.S. style, where maybe people are talking that 4 years is short enough for a bad president, meaning at least we won't suffer too much. But for a good president, at least after 4 years, he's then allowed to run again. Same. This is similar to the U.S. Style. No? What are your thoughts on that, Teddy? And then I'll ask Dr. Monares. Go ahead first.
I think we have to really veer away from the presidential system that put term limits.
So this is even a more drastic change.
The change
more for
should
the
be
drastic,
of the system.
beyond the term limits.
I am for a parliamentary system of government because it shows that the top 20 countries, there's only one presidential. And actually, it has shown that a parliamentary system with no term limits of the prime minister actually are better off in terms of
But
the economy.
did we try that during the Marcos era, and it kind of, the experiment didn't really pan out?
It was not a parliamentary system. It was bastardized because of Amendment number 6, putting Marcos a one-man legislator. So it was not actually a parliamentary system.
All right, your thoughts, Teddy, on perhaps a parliamentary system in order to, I guess, and in that regard, if you have a parliamentary system, then presidential term limits are necessarily extended.
Yes. Well, parliamentary system is another issue altogether. As far as term limits are
Are you
concerned.
open to that? Are you open to
or
that? The constitutional amendment to probably explore
At this point,
parliamentary?
no. At this point, no. You change the bicameral system that we now have, presidential system, and transform it into a parliamentary system, where the problem now is that you have a Congress being a doormat of the president, and the problem is the connivance that you have between the president and Congress. Hawak ng presidente ang Kongreso sa liig eh. Kung ngayon pa lang that there is supposed to be checks and balances.
You feel there will be no checks and balances
Pag ginawa mong parliament, it will be worse, no? The connivance between the executive and the legislative will even be worse because you merge them. And so I don't think it will solve the problem.
Right.
I mean, I'd rather have an anti-dynasty bill than, or probably we can talk about changing to a parliamentary system if we first have an anti-dynasty bill, if we first have a bill to abolish the pork barrel, but just simply changing it now, I think will not solve the problem.
All right, we need to take a short break. Meanwhile, you can react online via Facebook at facebook.com/SolarOpposingViews on 9TV, or tweet your comments at opposing_views. Use the hashtag #OVTermExtension. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. And we have with us Dr. Edwin Monares and Representative Teddy Casino. And our debate question for tonight, should we allow constitutional amendments in order to implement the so-called current political reforms? Now, Teddy, President Aquino, together with the legislative, seems to be banging heads with the Supreme Court. And do you agree that the Supreme Court's powers have gone overboard, and do you think the power of the Supreme Court should be clipped?
The funny thing is, the Supreme Court has the power to review, whether it's in the Constitution or not. That is the principle of checks and balances between the different departments. What the framers of the Constitution just did is put it on a more categorical provision because of the dangers of a return of the dictatorship. So I think even if the president manages to remove that provision in the Constitution, the Supreme Court must rule on issues of constitutionality.
By the nature of
by the nature.
Of powers.
Yes. So what is really happening here is that the president, out of his disagreement with the abolition of with the ruling on the pork barrel system, thinks that he can, through constitutional amendments, he can clip the powers of the judiciary. But, even if it's symbolic, removing that will eventually lead you towards dictatorship, towards authoritarianism.
Because the argument that's being brought up, again, by a lot of pundits and also some people, some sectors of society, is that the Supreme Court, which are not elected, these are people who are not elected to office, have the power to really overturn policies of people who are elected by the general public.
That's the way it goes, no? And the president should live with that. I was really bothered by the interview of the president when he cited the experience during the Marcos dictatorship, that the Supreme Court did not interfere in the declaration of martial law because the Supreme Court said that these are political matters that it does not involve itself into. And for the president to cite that implies that he wants a return to that kind of a system, that the Supreme Court does not interfere into political questions.
Washes its hands.
And precisely because that happened during martial law, the dictatorship had the veneer of legality. No? And he's, at least legally, it was not challenged in any of the departments. So I would rather have a categorical statement in the Constitution that states that this is the power, that the Supreme Court has the power of judicial review, rather than a silent provision or a watered-down provision, which will bring us closer to the Marcos dictatorship model.
All right. Dr. Monares, your thoughts on that? Do you think that the Supreme Court has gone overboard on its mandate, and do you think its power should be clipped?
On that issue, I think the Supreme Court is just doing its job. And that my position is if we have to amend the Constitution, I think all the more that we have to reinforce the power of the Supreme Court.
You think it should
because that's not a political, that's a chamber which is actually not political. So they can rule level-headedly.
All right. You think that the branches of our government need a lot of or some fine-tuning? Do you think that there's a major overhaul is required in order to change the political landscape and the political structure and organization?
My answer is a big yes, because the context of my answer is what is really happening to our people. The government is supposed to, in Section 5 of our Article 2, is to actually protect and defend the people and also work for the general welfare clause. But lo and behold, what is happening? This government is spending trillions of money, but it seems that the people's lot is not improving. So things to look into will be one, our system of government, like having two Congresses, like we have the House of Representatives and the Senate. And it's not an assurance, actually, that having two chambers can make you good laws. In fact, it's contributory to the division and the political chaos that we have. So I would suggest that I think we have to come up with only one assembly, perhaps.
And then a unicameral system.
A unicameral system, and this unicameral
a lot of senators will not be happy with that.
Yeah, but it's not about them. It's about the people. It's about the context we're talking, that the people actually are suffering. So, and then another reform will be if we have to put a number of seats to this unicameral body, then half of the seats to like professionals, lawyers, academicians, the religious, those who are working for the faith, or if it's not applicable, then maybe other sectors like businessmen, and then let us make them the head of this committee, because they are there. They know what they want, and they know where they want to bring this country, and they know the policies that they need. Instead of having all these people elected, I think we have to, because the context is different, then let us perhaps have 50% politicians, 50% technocrats.
Now, taking off from that, and again, quoting you earlier, Teddy, you said that we've never had a good president since Marcos, right? Or perhaps, or I think you said that we never had a good president.
Well, it's always a choice between the lesser evil.
Yeah, but you were saying that since this system that we have had in place since 1987, for example, has never produced a good president, and probably never produced good politicians. Do you think? Can you agree now with Dr. Edwin that now's the time to change the system?
Well, definitely we have to change the system.
I mean the structure. The
we have to overhaul the whole thing.
So you agree with the constitutional amendments?
But you will not be overhauling the system merely by extending the term of the president or clipping the powers of the judiciary. These are not the changes. These are not the political, economic changes that we need.
But let's say it needs a complete overhaul, like a parliamentary system.
Yes. And if that's the kind of charter change that we're talking about, You
Then
know,
you're for that.
removing the traditional politicians from power and putting in people who represent workers, who represent farmers, who represent business, who represent other sectors, who really comprise who the people are. If we have a constitution that categorically bans political dynasties, constitution that gives more flesh to freedom of information, these are the kinds of changes that probably will make me a more open-minded to
Okay.
charter change. But if we're talking about term extension, clipping the powers of judiciary, opening up the economy to more foreign investors, I think these are not the fundamental changes that need to be reflected in the Constitution.
All right, Dr. Monares, do you think we're having a constitutional crisis at this point?
I don't think there is a constitutional crisis. I think I look at it as the democratic rainbow that actually
It's happening,
all
actually.
sectors are engaged and they're debating, and it's healthy.
It's
No?
healthy.
Yeah, it's healthy. Fact is, we see, kasi ang tinitingnan lang, they always look at the separation of power principle, but they don't understand that after separation of power, there's also one check to that, one principle that goes with it. That's the
Co-equal branches working together.
checks and balances.
The checks and
The
balances,
checks and
yeah.
balances.
So they're working
And what is
together.
happening now is actually the checks and balances principle, and that's good.
Okay, because apart from the separation, of course, they
There
have
should be
to
checks and
we are
balances.
working together,
Yeah.
right? All right. Now, Teddy, do you think that we have a constitutional crisis?
It's not a constitutional crisis, it's a crisis of leadership. It's a crisis of a president who doesn't listen, a presidency who is incompetent, Congress that protects a self-serving Congress and then Senate, an economy that is not inclusive at all.
So don't you think
the
that-
solutions are not in amending the Constitution. The solutions are in changing fundamental economic, political policies, thoroughgoing reforms, which unfortunately it's the President and Congress which prevent these kinds of reforms from taking place. So that is the crisis there.
Given the constitutional organization that we have, did we ever come close to at least a relatively good president or presidency? I'm putting you in a corner here.
No,
Because the reason why I ask is that if time and again for the past 4 or 5 presidents it's always been bad, maybe there's something wrong fundamentally in the fundamental law of the land.
Well, the Constitution is just a reflection of our political economic system. No? And I would say in that sense, the Constitution reflects all the flaws that we have as a country, as an economy. But you do not change the country simply by changing the Constitution. I think let's change the country first. Let's, constitutions change after upheavals. We had an EDSA 1 for the Constitution to be changed. You had upheavals in the 70s, and without these upheavals, without people really coming together to push for the kind of reforms that they want, any amendment to the Constitution at this point will only get to serve who are already ruling, who are already benefiting from the system. And that is why I am always
So you feel that
worried.
upheaval should happen first?
Yes. I mean, otherwise, we will end up a constitution that serves more those who are already benefiting from the system.
All right, we need to take a short break at this point. More current political issues coming up. You're watching Opposing Views. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. Still with us, Dr. Edwin Monares, former Representative Teddy Casino. And our question, should we allow constitutional amendments in order to implement the so-called current political reforms? Now, Dr. Monares, there are rumors that of charter change in relation to allowing foreign ownership, 100% foreign ownership in corporations. We're talking about now the economic reforms that a lot of people are discussing, and probably a lot more people are open to, less allergic to. No? Let's discuss the story. Do you agree with these proposals and why?
My agreement is based on the fact that other countries would allow 100% ownership of foreigners. Contention is opposing. If I am a businessman, I want to put up and invest this much in your country, then I cannot even own a land that I can call my own, then there must be a problem.
Right.
And maybe
So even land,
this policy,
land ownership,
yeah,
you're open
land,
to
like,
revise that.
And second is like educational institutions. No? We know that our educational system is suffering. So if there is one good school wanting to put up 100% owned here, then it's not allowed by the Constitution.
So you're saying that
I am open to that.
at least to allow
relaxing
that, even
the
whether it's
economic
retail,
provision that is so
whether it's even broadcast.
Yeah.
You're open for complete foreign ownership.
Yeah.
All right. You don't think that it will, I guess, to some extent, have our patrimony affected or compromised?
Well, patrimony is the responsibility of the Filipino people. No? The businessman will come here to, we know for a fact that when they come here, even if 50%, 60%, 40% to 60 or 100%, they are here to earn. The thing is, we equate the investment with labor. So we have a high unemployment rate. So I think if that particular provision, that particular thing would happen, that they can own 100% and they can come, then maybe I can be open to that.
All right. Teddy, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't agree with the belief that the key problem of little investments in the Philippines is the lack of foreign or the stringent equity requirements.
You don't think so?
We're always compared with Thailand. You know, Thailand trumps us when it comes to foreign investments. But you know, the Philippines has more liberal, definitely more liberal equity requirements compared to Thailand in construction, in mining, oil and gas, tourism, insurance, healthcare, retail. Almost the same as far as telecoms, power generation, construction, transport, agriculture. So my point is that it's not the equity requirement. There are other factors, I think, that serve as disincentives to investors, like the very high cost of power, like the lack of infrastructure, red tape, bureaucracy, what's happening now in the pier,
it's all congested.
The congestion. These are the things I think that investors look at. Not really
Not so much
the equity. Yeah, kasi,
equity.
I mean, let's be honest about it. Naiikutan naman yung equity requirements. There are ways to go around that. And they have been going around that for the longest time. And in other countries where you have even more stringent equity requirements, like China, like Vietnam, for example, pumapasok pa rin yung investments because there are other attractions like cheaper cost of power, primarily.
But there are some countries, and I'll discuss this with Dr. Monares as well. No? There are some countries who have adhered to this principle, and they are reaping the benefits. I mean, like Singapore, for example, is very liberal, and you can set up a company there even online. No?
Well, if we look at the economic histories of these countries, Singapore, South Korea, but Singapore is, kasing malaki lang na Maynila yan eh. Let's take a more honest-to-goodness country like Korea, South Korea, like Japan, even the United States. I mean,
we're very liberal. No?
China, these countries opened up their economy after 2 to 3 decades of protectionist, deliberately planned economies. Unlike sa Pilipinas, wala yung domestic economy natin, napakahina pa. And then you open up your economy to the entry and exit of these foreign capital. The economic histories of these countries will tell you that it doesn't happen that way. You will have to have a certain period, a long period, where you develop your own industries, where you protect your own economy. And only then, when you have strategic, you have heavy industries, you have integrated industries, that's the time when you start opening up. But again, slowly. No? Ang nangyayari sa atin, biglaan eh. So I think what the proposal now to further open it up, I think will only lead to more problems.
All right. Now, some congressmen, Teddy, are insisting that this issue, this economic provision on equity and all that, will be the only priority if a possible charter change would occur. No? And they're assuring that we only want Chacha for these reasons. And do you believe that? Do you believe them, first of all, and that they will not touch the issue of, let's say, term extension or for public office and all that?
Well, until the final vote is cast on the third reading, you can never tell. Because in Congress, anyone can come in and offer an amendment. So there's no assurance to that.
In the convention.
Yes. Yeah. Even in what they're proposing now, no, through Chacha, through legislation. But even then, no, this idea that we need more foreign investments so that we will have an inclusive model of growth. Even that, I think, should be challenged. Because if you look at it from the 1980s, when we started really opening up our economy, foreign direct investments have increased 15-fold. Of course, it's smaller compared to our neighbors, but it's by leaps and bounds. Lumalaki yung foreign direct investments. Now it's around 47.5% of total investments in a year are foreign investments. But look at the unemployment figures. No, for the last decade, we have had the highest unemployment figures among Asia, in Asia. Look at the manufacturing. We're now down to the 1950s level. Share of manufacturing to GDP, to overall economy, is around just 20% from around 27-30% in the early 80s. So wages are going down. So job security is practically non-existent at this point. So sino ba talaga nakikinabang dyan sa foreign direct investments? Are they the ordinary people, ordinary Filipinos? Or just this select few of people who, like the top 50 in the Forbes magazine recently, and these are the very corporations and families that are pushing for economic provisions.
Now, Doc Monares, do you think that should we have, let's say, a constitutional convention, for example, and these politicians are saying that it's just purely economic provisions. Do you believe that will be the case? Or do you think we're putting ourselves in danger?
Well, it's always the timing actually that is actually being looked into by the people. With President Aquino's pronouncement, I think a lot of people will be worried about charter change. But if our legislators are actually thinking of an overhaul of the system, then I think it should be the timing. What's the timing that I'm proposing? Call for a constitutional convention, and then have them work what they are supposed to do in amending or revising the Constitution, and then or it can be in 2016, the election for the Constitutional Convention members. Delegates can be on 2016. And then thereafter, you have a new president. And then they can work. And then if they are through, then the amended or revised Constitution can be subjected to a plebiscite. But the amendment should cover all this. I think the problem is...
so you're saying we shouldn't limit ourselves purely on the economic front?
Yeah. It should be a complete overhaul. Like, for example, there should be an absolute ban on political dynasty. No? Second...
and how do we define that? How do you define political dynasties? Because obviously people have circumvented that. There is a provision in the Constitution already, right?
There are some formula like the triangle formula that when somebody is up, and then those that will vote twice over your surname will be excluded. Like, for example, if somebody is running already for president, then no senator because you have two voters voting for one family. No? So, but if, for example, there's a governor here, another governor here, they are father or they are brothers, it's okay because they are voted on by different set of voters.
Right.
That's that political dynasty that I have in mind. No?
All right. Okay, so we need to take a short break. Don't go away. When we come back, the results of our online poll on the issue and the final words of our guests. Stay tuned. You're watching Opposing Views. Welcome back. This is Opposing Views. I'm Rod Nepomuceno, and our guests for tonight, Dr. Edwin Monares and former Representative Teddy Casino. And our debate question for tonight, should we allow constitutional amendments in order to implement the so-called current political reforms? And we're in the tail end of the show. I wanted to ask this question to both of you, gentlemen. Doc Monares, which is better for you, parliamentary or presidential, but with solid political parties?
I will always go with parliamentary because.
Why is that? Because obviously we've tried parliamentary before during
No, it was not parliamentary.
That wasn't parliamentary.
That was dictatorship.
Pure dictatorship. All right. Okay.
The real parliamentary system is what you find in the top 20 countries except the US. A pure parliamentary system that actually has a very strong party system.
Why do you think it'll work for?
It works because it empowers even the small political party. Because, for example, if parties would not be able to get absolute majority, then they are forced to coalesce with small parties. And in the process, the small party can bargain. Okay, I will coalesce with you, but this is my advocacy. And it has to be supported by the government. And then secondly, it goes with the state financing the party that actually has the edge of winning. For example, it is, I think the computation is, if you have taken, for example, 41% of the vote and you get 41% of state funding, like that, it's in a proportional distribution. So I think parliamentary system is...
But there are several types of parliamentary systems. There's unicameral parliamentary systems, there's bicameral, and then obviously you have, in England, you have a monarchy.
Well,
monarchy there.
Parliamentary system, in a sense, will always have like presidential, the parliament can have many bodies or singular body. No? But it's still parliamentary system because in parliamentary system it's always the parliament that elects the head of government, and the head of the state is different. No, maybe it's president, or in a constitutional monarchy it's the king or queen.
Yeah, it's more of symbolic leadership.
It's symbolic leadership.
Cutting ribbons and all that.
There's only one parliamentary system. The varying differences is in terms of how many bodies will there be. And the other is, of course, the French type, which is parliamentary. Or they have used the best characteristic of the parliamentary system, and also you have a strong president.
And do you think there will be enough checks and balances in a system like that?
Yeah, because what checks and balance can be more effective, that you can debate the opposition. Like, for example, Congressman Teddy Casino will be face-to-face with the head of government. And then you are part of the prime minister, the head of government is part of legislation and also part of execution and part of making the budget and setting the policy, because they are in one body, the parliament.
All right. Okay, Teddy, your thoughts on this, parliamentary or a presidential system with a solid political party system?
Well, if you're going to be academic about it, no, I'd be more inclined to a parliamentary system. But you know, whether it's a parliamentary system or a presidential system, the more basic issues there is, do we have honest-to-goodness political parties? Especially political parties that represent the marginalized, poor sectors of society who comprise the majority of the people. Secondly, do you have election rules that level the playing field? Like spending on elections, for example, or funding for political parties. No, do you have a prohibition against political dynasties and such practices? Without these kinds of requirements, I think whether you go parliamentary or presidential,
it doesn't matter.
you get screwed up anyway. So yun
So
mas importante. And the context
Okay,
now.
not academically, but pragmatically.
Pragmatically,
Given our situation as a nation, do you think that parliamentary system will work vis-a-vis the presidential
it
system?
will work. Even a presidential system will work if certain
Stars align.
requisites are made. Certain fundamental political economic reforms are made.
And as you mentioned earlier, the anti-political dynasty.
Political dynasties, pork barrel, I think, the issue of funding for political parties, election laws. So I'd rather focus on these things than, open the Pandora's box of charter change. And the problem with the charter change now, as being proposed in Congress, it's really a stupid idea, There are 3 articles that are being amended, 11 provisions, 7 sections, and there's only one amendment. It's unless otherwise provided by law. So you don't even know what kind of amendment they want. It simply
It just opens
it simply opens up the Constitution for amendments by Congress. And I think that's dangerous, knowing the kind of Congress that we have. We might find ourselves with even a worse Constitution if that happens. So definitely, I will not agree.
So
to this.
at least your position is that we don't even need to overhaul the Constitution right now. Not even in the near future.
But probably, if we have a revolution tomorrow, then by all means, let's amend the Constitution the next day. But without that kind of fundamental change in our society,
In other words, given
amending the Constitution now and allowing these people in Congress to do it, I think we'll be worse off than we are now.
All right. Okay. We have enough time for your parting words, your final words. So, Doc Monares, I'll start with you. Final words to our audience regarding this debate question.
The Philippine Constitution has been there for the past 20 years, and it seems that any attempt to tinker it actually always fail. And the reason behind is always the purpose is the culprit, that it will only benefit the sitting president. However, the Constitution should be dynamic. It should respond to what is happening in the society, and a lot of changes had happened already. President Ramos has his PIRMA, President Estrada has his Concord, President Arroyo has Executive Order number 453 carried by Sigaw ng Bayan, and now President Aquino is also proposing for an amendment, and also there's a different version being pushed forward by Drilon and the Speaker of the House. I would agree with Congressman Casino that changing the Constitution will not in any way amount to anything unless other requisites will be present. So when I say I am for the amendment or revision of the Constitution, I mean it's not only to serve the sitting president for a term extension. Foremost is that, one, I agree with lifting the restrictive economic provisions. Second, let us also change the system of government. One, from unitary that we have today to federal. Second, from presidential to parliamentary. And then from bicameral Congress to a unicameral Congress. And then with that also goes the inclusion of amending also the system of our elections. And that is absolute prohibition of political dynasty, the recomposition of the COMELEC, the political party or anti-turncoatism to really make our party strong and ideologically based, and parties that would really have their agenda and not personal carried by a face of a single person. And then the state funding for electoral campaign for legitimate political parties. And then the fourth is I want the imposition of death penalty so that those who will be found corrupt will no longer be given pardon, but will be executed in Luneta.
Hospital arrest. Okay.
So that this country would really see that the government means business. And then number 5, I think it's very important that we should put in our Constitution the duties and obligation of the citizens, just like in 1973, Article 5. Because what we have in the Constitution are all the responsibilities and power the government. And there's no specific mention about what the people should do. I think we have to put the duties and obligations of these people. And with that, I am always for
the amendment.
Cha-cha.
Cha-cha. All right. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Monares. Teddy, your thoughts?
Well, you know, constitutional amendments don't happen in a vacuum. And we always have to look at the context and what the motives are for Cha-cha. The Cha-cha that is being pushed right now by the president is one, it is meant to extend his term of office. Secondly, it is meant to reduce or lessen the powers of the Supreme Court. And third, it is meant to remove whatever protection there is for our enterprises, Filipino enterprises, for our workers, for our farmers. And if that is the kind of Cha-cha that they're pushing now, I will be definitely against it, and I think it will not be in the national interest. The best time to amend charter change if there is really a strong, solid clamor for fundamental reforms and the general overhaul of the political and economic systems. But if Cha-cha is just meant to further entrench those who are already in power and those who have screwed the country for so many decades, then I think we're better off with what we have now, rather than allow them to further mangle and take advantage of the existing status quo.
All right. Thank you very much. Well said. Thanks to our guests, Dr. Edwin Monares, and of course, former Representative Teddy Casino. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. Now, let's see the viewers' opinion through our online poll. Should we allow constitutional amendments in order to implement the so-called current political reforms? Those who answered yes, 35%, and those who answered no, 65%. And that's our opposing views for tonight. Tune in again next week for another bold and engaging discussion of today's most relevant issues. I'm Rod Nepomuceno. Good night and God bless. Mga barbershop talk, as they say, or coffee shop talk, you hear people saying that it's high time that we change the Constitution. So let's start off first on the topic of term extensions of the president. No? Now, we have in our Constitution the 6 years, the 6-year term of the president. Now, in your mind, I will start first with you, Dr. Monares. Is 6 years short for a president's term? Or do you think we should extend it?
Well, many would say 6 years is long for a very bad president, and 6 years is actually so short for a good president. But you know, the real issue here is that these charter changes will always come up when a president, since FBR, is actually in the twilight of the term of office. So my position, if this is dividing the people during the end times of the term of the president, then why not open na lang this constitution, let's change it, and let's shift the parliamentary system.
Now's the time
let us lift all the term limits.
In other words, there's no right time or good time. If we are going to discuss it anyway, I mean, changing the term limits, so to speak, let's do it now. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, Teddy, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's right. 6 years is too long for a bad president. And even if it's a good president, there are other ways of continuing whatever reforms or legacies that he wants to do. And I think this is symptomatic of this clamor for a term extension.
Let's weigh in tonight if there's really a need to extend a president's term of office and the need to adjust or improve our current constitution to accommodate reforms. So our debate question for tonight: should we allow constitutional amendments in order to implement the so-called current political reforms? Good evening, I'm Rod Nepomuceno, and this is Opposing Views.
All right, joining us tonight in our discussion is Dr. Edwin Monares, political science professor from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. Good evening, Dr. Monares. Welcome back.
Good evening. And it is my position here that political reform should go on, and we are open for changing the constitution. And if it will mean lifting the term limits, so be it.
All right. Now, on the opposing side is former Bayan Muna Representative Teddy Casino. Welcome back, Representative Teddy.
Thank you, Rod, and
Yes.
good evening to everyone. I think amending the Constitution at this point is dangerous. It will not be in the best interest of the country if the President pursues on his plan to amend the Constitution, to extend his term, to clip the powers of the judiciary, and to further open up the economy to foreign interests.
All right, so let's discuss, let's start our discussion. Of course, Chacha has become almost like a bad word for a lot of people. No? At the same time, there's a lot of clamor. If you have, you talk, you may...
Hard-headedness and even a tendency towards dictatorship, I think it is dangerous to allow him another term. So I am not for amending the Constitution at this time.
Even assuming that we have, let's say, a good president, because you're saying that he's an incompetent president, even assuming that, let's say he was a good president, do you think we should change the Constitution to allow a president to run again?
If he were a good president, he would make the necessary preparations so that after his term, whatever programs and policies, whatever good programs and policies that he has done will be sustained. No? A good president, I think, should be humble enough to admit that not everything relies on him, that he should also try to develop other leaders to take over his place and continue whatever legacy he has.
Dr. Edwin, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that we should have an amendment of the Constitution to allow presidents to have a second term or run again?
Well, riding on what Teddy is saying, description of how good the president is actually relative. It is always good. The president will always be looked at as a good president by all of those who are in the government that are actually benefiting from the presidency. And for those who are not served well, will look at the president as bad.
As bad president.
So when is the right time? That's the question. When is the right time to amend the Constitution? When in fact it's been there for 27 years, and then everybody, the academe would say, the businessmen would say that it's about.
Ito po ang aking ikalimang sona. Isa na lamang ang natitira.
A little less than 2 years before the next national elections, political upheavals have reached unprecedented heights. The power struggle between the executive branch and the judiciary on the issue of President Aquino's Disbursement Acceleration Program, or DAP, has opened up calls for amendments to the Constitution. And in his recent interview, President Aquino suggested clipping the power of the Supreme Court. He also hinted at running for a second term, things that would require constitutional amendments.
Kayo ang boss ko.
The 1987 Constitution, which was promulgated by President Aquino's mother, limits the term of the president to 6 years. It also prohibits a re-election bid. Recently, even President Aquino's spokesperson has his own shares of slip of the tongue.
But let's wait for the endorsement of the president kung sino ang kanyang hahayagin bilang kanyang kandidato sa 2016 kung sakaling tutuloy ang 2016 election.
This leads many people to ask, are there threats to jeopardize the Philippine democracy?
Welcome to Opposing Views, a hard, straightforward discussion of today's most pressing issues. It's an interesting time to talk about Philippine politics.
Is symptomatic of the very personalistic view that we have of our politicians, especially the president, na lahat nakasalalay sa kanya. No? But if there are genuine political parties in the country, it doesn't matter if it's 4 years, if it's 6 years, if it's 12 years. Ang importante naman dyan, yung program, yung platform. But precisely because presidents really don't have programs and platforms that are reflected in their parties, na nagtutuloy-tuloyan.
Yeah, we don't We don't
Wala
have the two-party system. We don't
Yes,
effectively don't have that, no?
Every time that the president term ends, it always becomes an issue. Ikaw pa rin ba o dapat should we amend the Constitution? But in specifically for the president, for President Aquino, I think it will be against the interest of the country if he extends his term.
So in your position is we stick with the 6-year rule.
Yes, 6 years is bad. Another 6 years is, 6 years is too long for a bad president. We have a bad president, so why extend for another 6 years?
All right. So we've with that point that you've made, no, do you agree with although this might probably be a question that I cannot know what your answer will be. Do you agree with the constitutional amendment in order for a president to run again?
No. Yung amendments to the Constitution should always be taken in its context. And at the present context, where you have a president who wants to curtail the powers of the judiciary, who has shown incompetence, who has shown